What's up everybody, it's Charles. In this video, we are going to be replacing the vehicle battery on this sweet, sweet, sweet Mazda Miata. Having a dead or a weak vehicle battery is probably one of the most common things that go wrong with cars today. And at some point, you're probably going to experience putting the key in, turning the ignition, and hearing nothing or nothing but that click, click, click sound because your car won't start. Not only is that a super big hassle, but having a dead battery can leave you stranded. Now, we should be keeping jumper cables or a battery jump pack in our car at all times. That way, if we do have a dead battery, we can at least get back on the road. But at some point, that old battery is probably going to have to be replaced. Today, batteries on average last about 3 to 6 years, depending on the vehicle and how much electronic equipment is in the car. And in most vehicles, it's a pretty easy DIY. So today, I'm going to give you 5 tips on replacing your own vehicle battery. Also, big thanks to CRC Industries for providing some goodies for this install, as well as sponsoring this video. And also, side note, their Power Lube spray is the best spray I've ever found to make your Mark IV door stop squeaking. And as always, I'll put links to everything we're going to use today down in the description. One other thing, before we get going, batteries have some nasty stuff inside of them, so we want to make sure we're wearing gloves, safety equipment, clothes we don't mind getting ruined in case we get battery acid on them. In addition to that, vehicle batteries can be pretty heavy, so we want to make sure we're using proper lifting techniques, maybe using one of these battery lifters. So with that, let's get into 5 tips for replacing your vehicle battery. Real quick, when it comes to tools to do this job, typically basic hand tools will get it done. There's also a couple of things that are very helpful, like a battery brush to clean the terminals and posts, and a battery terminal spreader, which I'll show you guys exactly how to use. Tip number 1, make sure that you get the right size batteries. Batteries come in different group numbers based primarily on size. But there are other things to consider, like what kind of cells and the chemistry type of the battery. You want to make sure to get the one that the car is meant to have. We can do this by measuring our vehicle battery, looking for the cranking amps, the cold cranking amps, or the DIN rating on top of the battery, and be sure that if it's an absorbent glass mat battery or a lead acid battery, that we get the right one. If you're not sure, you can always call the dealership of your vehicle manufacturer and ask what kind of battery the car is supposed to have. We didn't get this one at the dealership, but we could still call and get that information. You can also consider bringing the battery with you when you go get a new one. As long as it had the right thing to begin with, this will almost guarantee that you're going to get the right battery. Not only that, it makes getting the core charge back quite a bit easier, and you don't have to worry about a second trip back to the store to get the battery recycled. Now, on most cars, this job is pretty easy to do, but there are some rules that we have to follow. Of course, we need to gain access to our vehicle battery. This one happens to be in the trunk. For tip number 2, that's going to be properly disconnect and remove the vehicle battery. Now, before getting started, it's not a bad idea to do a quick visual inspection on your cables and make sure that you don't have a cable issue and a battery issue. Step 1 to properly disconnect and remove the battery is to work with the ignition off. We always want to make sure that we start off by disconnecting the negative battery cable first. If you're not sure which one that is, oftentimes the negative cable is either black or brown, or in this case, black with a yellow tracer. It usually doesn't have a cover on it, and typically the battery itself is marked with a minus sign. We want to make sure while we're loosening this cable, we don't let our wrench touch anything metal. If we do it wrong and end up touching our tool to some metal or across the terminals, we can make for a bad day. That can cause a lot of sparks, maybe a fire, or even weld your tool to the car. Once our negative terminal is loose, we're going to take it off the battery, and we want to set that aside so that we don't accidentally bump it and have it make contact with the post again. So go ahead and tuck that all the way out of the way. Next, we'll go ahead and remove the positive cable. Following the same rules, we don't want to touch any metal, and when the cable's off, we want to tuck it out of the way. Now our battery's completely disconnected. Let's go ahead and remove the battery hold down. Now we can go ahead and remove our hold down. Now, 2 more things that we got to pay attention to. 1, we need to remove the battery out of this well, but before we do that, we have to take off these 2 vent tubes. These allow the battery to off gas and send that gas outside the vehicle. If your battery has these, you want to make sure that you will, 1, take them off the battery, and 2, be sure that they go back on when you're done. Now simply lift the battery out. This is a super small battery, so it's going to be really easy If your battery's big, you may want to use a battery lifter in order to get it out. Tip number 3 is going to be to make sure we get everything clean. Having a good connection between the terminal and the post of the battery is vital. Modern cars are very sensitive to battery voltage, and we want to make sure our connections are good. Now, these posts are going to be pretty easy to clean because they're actually in pretty good condition. But this is where we're going to take our battery brush and just clean that out. We'll do the same thing for the negative terminal. If you have a terminal that's being stubborn, we can use some battery cleaner to help get that a little bit cleaner. First, we'll take a rag and throw that down there. Then we'll just go ahead and spray some battery cleaner. I also like the way this stuff smells. This cleaner also has an acid detector, so we would know right away if we had a battery that was leaking or terminals that had battery acid on them. If it's got real severe buildup, go ahead and let that chill for a few minutes and let the cleaner do its work. All right, so we're good there. We can go ahead and clean any residual cleaner off of our terminals. Get our rag out of there. We'll actually go ahead and clean some of the overspray out. Now, it's not a bad idea too if when you're doing this you clean the battery hold down. This one's kind of dirty, but more importantly it's all busted up. So at some point we probably need to replace this. Since I don't have another one for now, we're just gonna go ahead and wipe it out and put it back in. If you had a severe battery failure, you really would want to inspect underneath, because that battery acid can cause corrosion, damage to wires, make for some pretty bad damage to whatever's underneath the battery. You do also, while you're down here, want to do a very thorough inspection on the cables and make sure that they're in good condition, no frayed wires, nothing coming apart. And if you do have corrosion, you really want to get it all out of there. All right, tip number 4 is going to be properly install the battery. This is probably the one I've seen done wrong the most. We want to start off by gently setting our battery in place. Make sure the positive terminal is where the positive cable is and the negative terminal is where the negative cable is. That way if something accidentally bumps both posts, we don't have to worry about it. Now you also want to set this down. You don't want to just drop it in place and cause damage to the battery tray like mine's damage, or even worse, damage the battery. Now from here, the steps may vary depending on the vehicle. Let's go ahead and get our vent tubes back on. There we go. Next, what we're gonna do, we're gonna go ahead and put our battery hold down on. Now this step, you may have to do the terminals first, then the hold down. It really all depends on the vehicle. For this one though, I'm gonna go ahead and put the hold down on first. You may have to shift the battery around a little bit to make sure that you get it installed correctly. Some batteries, like the VW batteries, have a little lip at the bottom of them that you have to get lined up. If you don't, the battery won't sit correctly. It's very important that you get this battery hold down installed, first of all, and installed correctly. Not having it installed properly could lead to the battery maybe shifted all the way one way or the other, causing stress on one or both of the cables. So this is really important. You need to get this back where the battery's supposed to go. We'll go ahead and tighten the longest bolt ever. Now you may not want to tighten this down all the way until you're all done with the battery, in case you need to shift it around a little bit to make sure we don't have any stress on the cables. Now before we install the terminals, there's one other thing that we're going to want to do. We want to make sure that the opening of the terminal fits the post of the battery so that the terminal slides all the way down. And we can remove our little protective cap here and test that. Now remember, make sure your negative terminal is all the way off. We can slide this down. This one slides all the way down and it's going to end up seating really, really nicely. What happens if it doesn't though? I've seen so many batteries where someone just puts it like that and then tightens it down. That can lead to this terminal walking off or poor connections, or you'll never actually get it tight is usually what happens, and that can cause some crazy electrical issues. So if you run into where you can't get this down all the way seated on the battery, you don't want to hit it with a hammer or anything crazy like that. What we're going to do is we're going to take our terminal spreading tool, we're going to go into that terminal, and we're gently going to open it up a little bit. You don't want to go full bore, Hulk Hercules on these terminals. Just gently spread them open a little bit. Once you do that, go ahead and slide it all the way on. Now notice I did the positive terminal first. Always install the positive terminal first, then do the negative terminal. And because I don't like walking away from a loose bolt, let's go ahead and tighten this up. Now I used to be in the camp of just tightening this down as tight as you can, but you actually may want to pay attention to the torque specs. Some of these cables are very fragile and don't need to be tightened very tight. Others, like my Golf R, have electronics on them, and you don't want to damage those electronics. So if there is a torque spec, make sure you pay attention to it. Now we're gonna go ahead and do the same thing for our negative terminal. Be sure to take the little cap off. Yes, I have seen cars get towed in because someone left this little cap on it. I like to leave them on until I'm ready to put the terminal on. You can take them off right away if you want, but make sure that you don't do this because your car won't start. Now we used our terminal brush to clean the terminals on it, but if we flip this over, we notice there is an inside scrubby brush here. This is to clean the post of the battery if you need to. This is a brand new battery, so we don't really need to, but that's how that piece works. Not a bad little $4 something tool to have. We'll get our terminal spreading pliers. Go ahead and open that up if needed. Remember, be real gentle with this. You don't want to break the terminal end. You can replace these terminal ends pretty easily, but we don't want to if we don't have to. Next, what we're gonna do is we're gonna hook up the negative terminal. We already have the positive terminal hooked up. Remember, negative terminal off first and on last. Go all the way down. Make sure that it's seated all the way down. We'll go ahead and tighten that up. Make sure our battery's in a good location. Make sure there's no stress on either one of the cables. Now we can go ahead and snug down the rest of the battery hold down. And if you want to do one last bit of protection, hit it with some battery terminal protector. All you do, get near the terminal. Same thing for the negative terminal. This is not as big of a deal on a car with the battery inside. It's not a bad idea to hit the terminals and posts with it. Something else you can also consider is using some dielectric grease. If you had a lot of corrosion from, say, a battery leaking or exploding, and you have electrical connectors you need to clean, hitting it with something like this may be the best option. And finally, if you have any kind of protective covers or anything that were on the battery, go ahead and put that back on. That one doesn't stay on very well. Clean the overspray from your protector if you want to. Tip number 5 is going to be finishing the job properly. I like to do this quick test of a volt drop between the battery terminal and the battery post. This is going to make sure that our connection at the terminal is actually good. You are going to need a multimeter for this, so if you don't have one, well, pick one up. You can get them pretty cheap, or just go ahead and skip this part and move along to the end. But if you do have a multimeter, what we're going to do is we're going to turn it on. We're going to set it to resistance. Why? Because we check our meter leads every single time. Touch your meter leads together, and 0.2, give them a little wiggle, 0.3, ooh, 0.5. Maybe it's time for some new meter leads. I'm actually happy with that. 0.1 ohms, good there. Now we're gonna go ahead and set it to DC volts. That setting right there. And this is pretty easy. We'll take our red lead and our black lead. We'll touch one to the post of the battery and one to the terminal, and we should get 0. If we don't get 0, that means we have an issue with the connection from the post to the terminal. If we do get 0 or like 0.001, then we're good to go. We'll go ahead and do the same thing for the ground side. Now, as we finish the job properly, we want to make sure that we do things like reset our clock, reset the pinch protection on our windows if we have it. In addition to that, some modern cars might actually have another step where we have to get the scan tool and perform a battery adaptation. We need to tell the battery management system that, hey, we put a new vehicle battery in it. Not doing this can cause charging issues with the car, as well as some features not to work. On the Golf R, for example, the auto start stop won't work if you don't tell the vehicle it's got a new battery. This is not quite as common and really just favors more modern vehicles, but it is something you might want to check your owner's manual on. All right, so there we have it. Nice and easy job. What other tips do you guys have for replacing vehicle batteries? Thanks again to CRC Industries for sponsoring this video. Links to everything we used today will be down in the description. Guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you again next time. Oh, and what do you think? Something other than a VW in the garage. It's kind of weird. Also, this car's ultra tiny. And in case you didn't know, this is an upcoming project at some point. But for now, at least I don't have to jumpstart it.